Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion will be focused on Azure ARC and specifically talking about servers as they relate to Azure ARC. You'll notice this session is titled an introduction. That is exactly what it is because there's enough here in Azure ARC, specifically related to servers, that I do want to dig deeply into each of the things that I will talk about here in an overview session. I want to dig into each one and show each one operating, right? But for the purpose of today's discussion, it will just be to give a general sense of those different items that you can do and manage with servers in Azure Arc. So let's go ahead and get into it. So our agenda for today will be as follows. What is an Azure Arc enabled server? Why do we care about having an Azure Arc enabled server? And then digging into the Azure Arc enabled server specifically, what are the requirements? How does it really work, right? And then how do we configure one? So if we need to onboard servers into Azure Arc, how do we do that, right? And there's several different ways. I'll show you one. We'll see what it looks like to have an Azure Arc enabled server when we get to the in action piece. We'll wrap up with just some tips and tricks, not really troubleshooting for this presentation, but we'll wrap it up there, right? Okay, so what is an Azure Arc enabled server? So the first question or the first bullet that I have is servers, right? Servers with a question mark. Is this just servers? And what kind of servers, right? Well, so yes, Azure Arc is focused on server management. It is not focused on workstation management. Could you actually load workstations up into Azure Arc? Probably. I actually have with Windows 10 and Windows 11. I didn't play with them a great deal to see what works, what didn't work. I was just curious if you could, because I I was just curious, right? So it's not geared for that though. It's geared for server management, right? So now that is Windows and that is Linux servers as well, but that's what it's geared for. So in the next part, the Azure to the non-Azure. So we talked about this in the introduction session, but just to reiterate, uh, the whole point of Azure Arc is to take the control plane that exists in Azure and extend it to devices, to servers in this case, that exist outside of Azure. So to be specific, if you have servers for virtual machine servers sitting over in a third-party cloud, so AWS or Google Cloud or IBM Cloud or Tom's Cloud or whoever's cloud it is, right? This is a way to take the familiar controls from Azure that hopefully you're using and appreciate and extend them to use with these third-party uh, cloud or servers based in third-party cloud. In the same way, you can take your on-prem servers that are either physical or virtual and onboard those into Azure, right? And so that would be again, if you're running virtual machines in VMware or Hyper-V or whatever virtualization solution you're using, doesn't matter, or they're physical boxes, then you can onboard them to be able to manage them from Azure using the familiar controls. Again, the beauty of, and you'll see this in a minute, of Azure Arc is extending that Azure control plane so that you have that single pane of glass to be able to do different management capabilities very richly across all of your server infrastructure in this case, right? Now, just to kind of peek ahead a little bit, so servers is one aspect of Azure Arc, as we talked about in the intro. There are a lot of other aspects to Azure Arc, like Kubernetes or SQL management or so on, right? We will get to those. We are focused on servers now. So whenever I say server, don't think that is only what Azure Arc will do. It's servers and server workloads, right? Server kind of workloads. Kubernetes can be, in Azure, it can be whatever. So I'm not going to go down that road right now, but that's where we're focused. And management as well, right? Having the ability to do different management capabilities on your Azure Arc enabled servers, just like you can on Azure servers. So update management, one of the capabilities. You can do that with Windows and Linux. You can enable consistent control and compliance of your servers, whether they're in Azure or whether they are on-prem or in a third-party data center, as I mentioned. Right? I mentioned this in the intro. Let me mention it again. One of the potential oddities, and it's not really odd, right? But one of the potential oddities of Azure Arc is it can onboard servers from basically anywhere and let you manage them through your familiar Azure portal. The only place that you can't onboard servers into Azure Arc is when those servers are running in Azure to start with, right? Why? Because again, if you have servers running in Azure, you already have all of these controls that you can implement on those servers. There's no need to extend anything because you're natively getting what Azure has to offer. The extension only applies to those that are not in Azure that you want to control as if they are in Azure, and that's where Azure Arc comes in, right? Okay, so another piece, logs. So a component of Azure Arc is log analytics. Now you don't have to use log analytics if you don't want to. Some of the solutions that are available with Azure Arc will rely on log analytics, like update management, change tracking, and such, right? But that's a UI that the UI is basically exposing detail from log analytics, and we know how to interact with log analytics. So if you don't know how to interact with log analytics, that's okay. We know how. But if you do know how to interact with log analytics, then we'll provide you an interface where you can pull out some of the data yourself. So monitoring insights. So I mentioned, well, I did in the introduction, I'll mention it again here. One of the things that Azure Arc will bring for you on servers is monitoring monitoring capabilities. These are not the same monitoring capabilities as what you have with something like Operations Manager. Operations Manager, incredibly robust set of monitoring capabilities. But if you need some idea what's going on with your servers, there's some really good information that's available with monitoring insights that I'll show you, right? Policies. So policies is a whole set of things that you can define against your own environment to make sure your devices, your servers in this case, adhere to the policies that you want. So by default, we have north of 900 policies that are there for you to pick and choose from. You can also set up custom policies, right? I'll show you this module. We'll dig in more deeply later session. Change tracking and inventory. Now, this one is really, really cool. So if there are changes in your environment on your servers, things that you want to know what's going on, right, with those servers, change tracking and inventory really will help you understand what those changes have been, right? Enabling that requires, again, just turning on the change tracking feature. I'll show you how to do that. But really, really, really powerful stuff whenever you turn it on. This is the security piece is the one piece that I'll show you where it is, but it's not hooked up right now, right? This is the tie-in for Defender pieces that will help you manage your servers, right? I have Defender already turned on and connected with Intune, so I haven't really done it here. That may be something we dig into in a future session. I haven't decided yet, but it's really, really cool and powerful to be able to bring Defender for Endpoint to bear on your Azure Arc enabled servers. And then the last thing, at least I think it's the last thing for now, is Windows Admin Center, right? Windows Admin Center is a piece that is really cool to be able to manage your servers in a way that perhaps uh, would be beneficial to you without having to connect to the servers and so on. We'll see that, right? And now embedded with all of this, so these are the big categories. Embedded within all of this are other capabilities that you can use on your servers. You can use Azure Arc to deploy software to your servers, right? That's not listed here, but you absolutely can. I guess arguably it is with update management, but there's Azure Arc to be able to deploy software. That uses a different engine than config management. We'll show that to you as we go into future sessions, not in this overview, right? That and there's a whole section of things called extensions that you can actually put on your server. Just again, kind of sneak preview ahead. One of the things you can do with Azure Arc is manage your SQL servers wherever they are, right? The way we do that is by installing an extension, a SQL Server Management extension on those servers, right? And so you'll see some of those elements come in as we talk about things like SQL. You'll see some of those, or we'll see. I don't know yet. I haven't planned the subsequent sessions on this yet. We'll see if we get into more discussion of extensions further in the server series. So that's yet to be determined, right? Okay. So why? So that's what Azure Arc enabled servers are. Why do we care about it? Well, hopefully, we understand why we care about it just from what you've already heard. But consistency is a really big deal. Being able to manage your devices in a consistent way, right? So, uh, right now, it may be a situation where you have certain management tools that manage Azure servers, right? And it maybe you have another set of management tools like Config Manager or something else that manages servers on-prem, right? Mentioned in the introduction. There are good things about Config Manager for sure when it comes to server management. There's good things about Azure Arc, and having the ability to use the best tool out of the appropriate tool set is really cool. You can have Azure Arc side by side with a Config Manager managed server if you want to. You can have just Azure Arc if you want to. The flexibility is there, right? Being able to choose the right tool for the right job is very important. So Azure Arc enables you to do that. When it comes to scope, right? Again, already talked about it. Say it again. Huge scope here. It's Windows. It's Linux servers. It's servers that exist in any cloud provider that you might happen to use. It's servers that exist across your on-prem data centers, perhaps, maybe being run with different virtualization engines, physical devices as well, right? These could be whatever devices you choose. They could be edge devices in your environment, right? So tons of capability here. Okay, so in terms of requirements, there are some. A lot of these we document, so I'm not going to go through the process of reading to you all the URLs and different networking things that we need. We'll just call out some. Of course, you need a supported server in order to be able to do that. So I've ad nauseum spoken about that, a supported server being in pretty much any location, right? The only place that I mentioned you can't install or use Azure Arc is in Azure itself, because again, those servers already are enabled with these capabilities by being part of Azure. But there is one place where you can Arc enable Azure-based servers, and that's with Azure Stack HCL, right? So you can Arc enable servers in Azure Stack HCL, um, and so on, right? But that's really the only place. You need a supported operating system for working with Azure Arc as well. So for the Windows side, that starts with Server 2008 R2, 2012 R2, and forward. Right. For Linux, there's a number of distributions that we support. So we support Ubuntu 16.04 and 20.04. We support CentOS version 7 and 8 right now. SUSE Linux uh, versions 12 and 15, Red Hat versions 7 and 8, Amazon Linux 2, Oracle Linux 7 and 8. Now, check to see what the supported list includes. It could change from the time that I'm recording this, but those are the ones that we support now. There is software that's required. On the Windows side, that would be .NET Framework 4.6 or later, Windows PowerShell 5.1 or later. I don't know off the top of my head what it is for Linux. Linux may have what it already needs for that. You may have some prereqs there, so make sure and check. You need certain permissions in Azure to be able to connect those servers to be able to um, deal with resource groups and different things in Azure. Again, those are documented. I'm not going to just rattle off what those are. One thing is about it is scale. So scale isn't really a requirement per se, right? It's something to be aware of. So in a single resource group, you can have up to 5,000 Azure Arc servers. Now, it could be that you have more than 5,000 servers that you want to manage. That's fine, right? Just add another resource group, and that's workable. I wish I still had this set up in my lab. I'll maybe do that whenever we get into some of the more specific stuff with dedicated sessions to things like update management and so on with Azure Arc servers. But right now I have one server in my lab in a given resource group. I have historically had a couple of other servers in there from different resource groups. The point is that those servers, no matter what resource group they're in, they will show up in the Azure Arc console, right? So don't let the scale limit of 5,000 concern you. If you go over that, then just add another resource group and you should be able to see that device in Azure Arc without any problem at all. Right. So there's some networking requirements out there. So making sure that your network is supported, has the different ports open that need to be opened, and access to certain URLs and different things. Right. If you have a proxy server, you can absolutely use that proxy server. It's not required. There's no additional security that you get from using a proxy server. The connections with Azure Arc are secure by default, but it is supported to use a proxy server if you like. Service tags are out there that you can use. Now, this is, I guess, strictly maybe not a requirement, but it's a good thing to be aware of. I see it's not on the PowerPoint slide. Sorry about that. But service tags allow you to specify detail about a given server so that you can know perhaps what region it's in, what cloud it's in, what data center it's in, blah, blah, blah. Whatever tags make sense to you, then you can put on top of the server with service tags. Still, in the networking side, there's some URLs that you need to know. And again, those are documented, so I'm not going to spend the time there. You need to have TLS 1.2. So that's a capability. And then there's a set of Azure resource providers. So a number of these resource providers could very well be enabled already, right? A number of them are by default. Some of them might not be. So the documentation will tell you what the resource providers are, and the way you enable that is to go into into subscriptions, and then pick the subscription you want and choose resource provider and make sure that the given resource providers are enabled there. There's also some ways to do it with PowerShell or Azure CLI. We have that in the documents if you want to look at it. There's requirements for the Azure Connected Machine Agent. So that is the one that is absolutely required to get a server connected with Azure Arc. That's the only one that is truly required, right? Now, practically, the log analytics agent is also required because there's certain capabilities that almost every company, I'm sure, would want to use that requires the log analytics agent. So, in practical terms, it's the connected machine agent and the log analytics agent. And then also, if you're going to have the log analytics agent, you need to have a log analytics workspace. So that it's up to you what you do with that. Um, but know that you need to have that for sure, right? Okay, so I think that's it for the requirements that I want to talk about. Um, yeah, so I'll say a couple of things. So we're going to show you how to connect an Azure server to Azure Arc. Sorry, I'm going to show you how to connect a server to Azure Arc, right? It's pretty simple the way I'm going to show you in the UI, but know that there's a lot of other ways to do it, right? You can actually uh, involve other kinds of management software like Config Manager and use that to deploy the required components, right? So there's a number of ways to do it. I'll talk about that again whenever I get to it, but just to call that out. The other thing is the log analytics workspace. So I'll mention this again too, right? You may already have a log analytics workspace. If you do and you want to use that, okay, that's fine, right? Assuming it's accessible and you can pull it up for the subscription and the resource group and different things that you need, right? But you might also consider having a separate log analytics workspace for Azure Arc type activities. Up to you, but that's certainly something to consider in planning. In terms of how this works, so I showed this slide whenever we had the introduction session. And so in terms of how this works, really, this is just an illustration to show that Azure Arc is an extension. The goal of it is to extend Azure and the goodness that comes through the Azure Resource Manager tie-ins like being able to have a single pane of glass and use role-based access and security and compliance and different things, cloud-based uh, or cloud native practices, whatever. Take those things that you're using in Azure anyway and extend them over using Azure Arc to servers, no matter where they are. Right? Okay, pretty simple. Turning the page, let's talk about how we go about configuring this. So, a couple of general things before we get into this, and I've mentioned a couple of these already, right? Azure Arc relies on log analytics as a very key component for certain things. So, almost certainly, you're going to want to have a log analytics workspace. So again, it's up to you what you decide to do with that. If you have an existing log analytics workspace, you can use that. If you need to create a new one to line it up with Azure Arc and what you're configuring, then you can do that too, right? Completely and totally up to you. Another piece is your service principal. So you're going to need a service principal in order to navigate connections to managed Azure Arc servers, get things installed, and so forth. You'll see in a minute that my service principal is actually expired right now. It doesn't affect my ability to do anything, as far as I can tell, could be wrong, with my Azure Arc enabled server right now because the service principal really was used to help install it. So I'm going to show you how to do the service principal creation in the UI. But know that you can also use uh, Azure PowerShell as an example to be able to create your service principal. So it's really up to you how you decide to do it, but let me show you what it looks like in the Azure portal. So I'm going to pull in the Azure portal here. This is the home page. And to get to my service principal, I'm just going to navigate to server, and you'll see Azure Arc here, right? So my server, hopefully, will show connected, and it does, and that's awesome. And I want to call out resource group here. Remember I mentioned that there's a scale limit of 5,000 Azure Arc enabled servers per resource group. And so if you have other Azure Arc servers installed in other resource groups, then we will show you the different resource groups in this column, right? So, but we're right now talking about service principals. So now that I've got this up in front of me, then I can open the left-hand menu and open up service principals, right? That is something I need. And so I do have a service principal here. It is, the client secret is expired, right? So I guess the service principal account isn't expired. The actual client secret is expired. So I need to fix that after this session and have something that's actually not expired, so I'll do that. But I do have my service principal created. If I want to create another one, I can, and I'll go through this wizard, right? And it'll give me the option to specify some details. I will just call this demo because I'm not going to save it. And then I decide where is the service principal going to be effective? Is it going to be effective at the entire subscription level, in which case this grays out, or is it going to be at the resource group level? Again, totally up to you, right? Make sure that your subscription and resource group match what you intend for where you're wanting this service principal to be used, right? And then from here, client secret. So I can decide how long that client secret lasts. So I'll tend to choose 1 month. And then role assignments. So select whatever roles that you want to assign to the service principal. And in this case, it would be Azure Connected Machine Onboarding, right? And then I would save it, and the service principal is ready to be used, right? So I've got one. I don't need to create another one, so I'll just cancel that out, and I will cancel this out, and then just go back to servers, Azure Arc, because we'll be there more in a minute, right? So I'll pull that down for just a sec. Okay, so those are some prerequisite things. Now we need to actually go through the process. Now that we have that kind of done, now we're ready to go through the process of onboarding a server into Azure Arc. So I've done that. I've got my one server connected. So here is my one server, right? This one is my Azure Arc enabled server. We're good there. And, but let me show you how you can do it. So I'll pull Azure back into the screen. All right, so here I am, Azure Arc. So if I want to add a server, then click on that, and you're going to be presented with a couple of options. The first is just add a single server. So if you're testing like I am and you just want to add a single server, this is your simplest pathway to be able to do that. If you are preparing production deployments and you want to onboard multiple servers, this is the pathway to do that. I'll show you both. There's other options down here though, like add servers from update management, right? That's an option that is in preview. Recently added, I believe. I don't recall seeing that. I can't pinpoint exactly when that was added, but I think that's a recent add from when I started working with Azure ARC. So here, if you are managing non-Azure servers with update management, pretty easy to use that fact to go ahead and target those servers to upload them or to sync them with Azure ARC. So that's one thing. Here's another option, Azure Migrate. So if you have VMware, vSphere, then you can just use that to go ahead and onboard servers, those servers into Azure ARC. So I'm not going to deal with these, just know that they're there. Also know that what I'm about to do and show you with these two, it's going to result in a script being available to you that you can download and run on servers that you want to enable for Azure ARC, right? Those scripts, really all they're going to do is acquire the connected machine agent and install the connected machine agent and adjust some things. You'll see it in the script. You could do those things manually. I've already mentioned that, right? You don't have to use the script. You could use the script and deploy it whatever way you want. You could use config manager to deploy it. You could use group policy to deploy it. You could use a task sequence to deploy it, a package, whatever it is that you want. You could do. You could even use maybe a configuration item and detect whether a server is onboarded to Azure ARC, and if not, go ahead and force that to be done, right? So lots of different options, but we'll keep it simple for now because all we care about is making sure that we get a server uploaded to or connected to Azure ARC. So we'll start here. I'm going to generate my script for one server, right? So the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to be presented with a list of prerequisites that I would make sure are in place, right? And then I'll click next. And so once I click next, I'm going to provide the details about where the resource is. So the subscription, the resource group that the server is in, right? And then other detail that I want to validate. And then here, whether it's a Windows server or a Linux server. So in my lab right now, as you've seen, all I have is a single Windows server. Good enough to show the kinds of things that I want to show right now. Know that the same kind of processes that I have for Windows Server can be applied to Linux as well. I can install on a Linux server similarly to Windows. It will just be a different format for the script, right? And then here, as I configure the way that I'm going to connect my ARC-enabled server or my server to Azure ARC, I'm going to specify what kind of endpoint I want to use. And so do I want to use a public endpoint, right? Do I want to use a proxy server? Do I want to use a private endpoint? So for my lab, I'm just using a public endpoint. What you choose to use is up to you. Generally speaking, a private endpoint probably is a better option for security. In fact, if we look at the connectivity method, it tells you a little bit more about that, right? And when to use whatever, right? Okay, so we have that, so let's click next, right? And now I have the ability to put tags on the server to help uniquely identify that server in where it is and different things about it, right? I don't care about tags for my lab, so I'm just going to bypass this and click next. And so at the end of this, now I have a script that I can run, right? All I have to do is copy this script and take it to the machine I want to onboard and then continue to follow the instructions to run the script. And that's it, right? So you can look at the script. You can see what it's doing. It's going to download the installation package. It's going to install the agent, right? It's going to run a command line to connect. And really, that's all it does, right? That's all it does. So I could do that myself if I wanted to manually. No need to. I've got a script, so I can deploy that script. It'll take care of it. But again, this is for one machine. So to onboard my machine, I just copied this and ran it on my device, and it is onboarded now to Azure ARC. Well, we have another option here too, which is add multiple servers, and the options are different. Same prerequisites, right? But then we click next, and we again provide the resource detail. If I can scroll down here, right? So resource group there, right? And then what is my connectivity method going to be? In my case, it'll be a public endpoint. Click next, and now I'm going to choose authentication. I did not have authentication on the uh, screen where I was just doing a single server. So I have my Azure Arc Service Principal. If I don't have one here, then I can use this link to go create one, right? Just like I did, but I've already got it, so it's in the dropdown. So I'll just choose this and move on. And then also I have tags that I want to use potentially, right? And click next. And now I get to choose how I'm going to deploy this. So in the single server example, I just get a script and I run it on the device, and that's it. Here I can choose, hey, how am I going to go ahead and configure this to deploy out to my environment? So I mentioned using Config Manager. You can certainly do that if you want, and this calls out even using a task sequence, perhaps, if you want to. There's other methods you could use with Config Manager too, if you would prefer, but certainly a task sequence is workable. This is a script for multiple systems, perhaps. So here you would need to just update the script with the secret key information for the service principal, and then you can download it or copy and paste it, whatever, and run it. No problem, right? So pretty much the same exact script, right? A couple of modifications. And that is how we will get this server or a server or set of servers onboarded, right? So if I go back to my main screen, that's how this server was onboarded and is now connected into Azure Arc. So pretty darn simple to be able to set it up and test. Now, once you have the server onboarded, there's and you can try to hopefully it should connect right away. If it doesn't connect, there's definitely some troubleshooting things that you can do. We have a set of logs. I'm not going to go into the logs right now. I will just mention that there's an agent install log. If you go under program files and look for Azure Connected Machine Agent, there's a ton of stuff under there, including some extensions information and executables and different things, right? So take a look under there. A lot of information you can help troubleshoot. There's services that get installed. So the HIMDS server, the Azure Hybrid Instance metadata services out there. There's a GC ARC service, so guest configuration ARC service. There's an extension service that's out there. Different service accounts that are put out there. We document all this, so if you need to see that, and probably a good idea to familiarize yourself with it, then take a look at those. There's some security groups that we'll put out there too, and so on, right? So take a look at those if you just want to understand a little bit closer what's going on in the environment, right? Okay, so let's minimize this. Let's minimize this. There we go. And so now to the fun stuff, right? And that was kind of fun, being able to get a server onboarded into Azure Arc, kind of a big deal. And now let's start to see what capabilities there are. Okay, so we're about to look at the different capabilities in overview form. Remember, this is an introduction. We'll dig into these in future sessions of what we can do with an Azure Arc server once it's been onboarded, right? A couple of general comments first. So as I kind of showed you in the introductory session, and then I kind of showed you again, there is a status for an Azure Arc server that will tell you whether it's connected or whether it's not. If you don't have your Azure Arc server connected, then you're not going to be able to see much about it, right? Because it's not connected. So it's in my lab, having it disconnected, not a big deal. I can always turn it back on and have it connect. But having that happen in production is probably unexpected because servers generally would want to be up and running 24/7. So not a bad idea to have some resource health alerts. So if a server stops sending heartbeats to Azure, for example, you might want to know. And figure out whether it's offline, whether it's being rebooted, blah, 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 whatever it is, right? You might also want to create an Azure Advisor alert. Um, that way, you know if there's a newer version of the connected agent and so on that has security fixes, bug fixes, whatever that you can put out there, um, and so on, right? Okay, so what are the options for an Azure Arc enabled server? Well, to get into that, let's pull back in the Azure console and we'll just start playing around. So if I click into my server, I'm going to see some basic information about my server, right? Pretty standard stuff you would expect to be able to see the server name, see what resource group it's in, make sure it's connected, see what subscription it's part of, what the operating system version is specifically, and then also if we come down a little bit, what the version of the agent is. We can also see the cloud provider. In my case, it's a virtual machine running on my desktop, and so there is no cloud provider. It's just a local instance on my, again, laptop. But that will tell you if it's running over in another cloud provider, who that cloud provider is. So if we scroll on down, we start to see the capabilities. So update management is our first capability, and really pretty cool capability as well. Now I'm gonna click into update management, right, and then I'll show this to you a bit. So this is configured, right? We'll see some detail here, and again, it's boring. This is my one machine, and so not a real exciting view, but it does give you at least a flavor of what's in here. Let me pause here, though, and just have a couple of discussions. One is, I really, as I was looking at this, I was trying to consider what would it be like to use Azure Arc to manage my servers versus something like Configuration Manager. Lots and lots and lots of organizations use Configuration Manager to manage devices for security updates, and it does really good job, right? But it's something that you do monthly. You have to go and pull the updates down, identify which ones you need, wait for a scan, deploy those, and make sure that you're good, blah, 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 right? It works. It's a very accepted practice. People know how to do it. They do it all the time. But if you can make a more streamlined approach to being able to deploy these updates, I think every config manager admin would be in favor of that, right? And update management is that. Uh, Kind of going back to a point that I made earlier, and definitely said during the introduction, I think about when I think about Azure Arc compared to Config Manager, I think about co-management, and that's really a bad thing probably to say here because it's not co-management. Co-management is specifically orchestrating between Config Manager and workstations and does a really really good job of that. But the point of co-management is to be able to choose the best tool out of your tool belt to take the appropriate action, right? And so in that way, Azure Arc and Config Manager are similar, right? There's capabilities that Config Manager does really, really well, and you might want to continue to use. There's things that Azure Arc does really, really, really well, and you might want to use those. And update management may be one of those things where you choose to let Azure Arc take over that load, but yet you continue to use Config Manager for something like software distribution because, frankly, it's a more elegant thing, um, at least from my perspective so far, to let Config Manager do the software distribution versus Azure Arc. Right now, again, things change all the time, so it could be that that changes in the future, but for right now at least. The other thing that I'll mention, I have this installed. It's running, right? If you're going into this for the first time, you'll see a banner across this that basically tells you in order to make this work, you've got to enable update management on your automation account, right? Well, so let's go take a look at my automation accounts. And to do that, I'm just going to open another instance of the Azure portal and we'll search for automation accounts, right? So automation accounts. So if I'm going to be using an automation account, I'm going to need to have associated with it a log analytics workspace, right? So if you see me create a new automation account, um, as an example, it's going to ask me what my subscription is. It's going to ask me my resource group. Then it's going to ask me my authentication name here. And I swear it asked me where my log analytics workspace is. Oh, hang on a second. let's enter something here. Okay, so demo. Just do something simple like demo. Demo 1, 2, 3. Okay, good enough. Then I'll click next, right? And then it's going to ask me my managed identities, right? Then it's going to ask me networking, right? How I want that to be, and also through here, tags and so on. That's interesting. I could have sworn there was an entry here to ask for log analytics. Let me see. Oh yeah, I remember. The log analytics workspace is needed for update management, but you don't tie it in here. You tie it in when you configure update management. So if you don't have update management configured, you can enable it, and then you'll get asked a couple of questions, including what is your log analytics workspace? If you don't have one, then you can create one from that screen. But before you even do that, you need an automation account that will be able to work within that, right? And so you can tie the automation account to your updates management here. So if I want to, for example, make sure that update management is enabled, which it is for my automation accounts. But if I want to ensure that this automation account is tied into update management, then I just go into the automation account and then I go to update management. And this is where you'll have some configuration things to do. And I've already done them, so you don't need to do it here. But it would ask you some questions that you would answer, and then you would have to come, once you get that enabled, then you would have to come back into this. So leave update management and come back into update management in order to finish up some configurations. And one of the configurations that you will do is decide what accounts or what systems you want, right? So if I manage machines, there's going to be options here that, hey, I can add it to, certain systems. I can add it to uh, selected machines, so available machines, selected machines, or enable it to everyone. So I just enable it to everyone. So all the machines that get added get get connected with update management, right? So anyway, uh, once you set it up, pretty easy process to go through, and we document it really well. But that's what this is, and so you can add Azure VMs into this. You can add non-Azure VMs. We talk about how to do this. It pops up a link to documentation to show you how to add non-Azure VMs and so on into this, and so there we are, right? But anyway, so we're in update management. And now that I'm in update management, and it's all enabled, I have this nice dashboard that will tell me the kinds of things that are out there. Now, again, my lab, one machine, not really exciting. We will come back to this and spend some time with this uh, specifically, but just an overview. I'm going to see uh, the overall compliance. In my case, I'm not compliant. I'm missing updates. In fact, I'm missing 9 updates. And so my update readiness agent, interesting, is not currently configured. I don't, that wasn't this way earlier this morning. It may just be a timing thing. Doesn't matter because we'll come back to this. But scrolling on down, I will see the updates that are missing. So I have 9 missing updates. I can see all of what they are, and I can decide what to deploy, what not, right? So this is just my overview dashboard. Now, if I want to go through and work with updates, so I can actually schedule an update deployment just by clicking this. And so I can give the name demo as an example. I can choose if it's a Windows or a Linux deployment. In my case, it's only Windows because I don't have any Linux servers configured right now. I can decide my runtime settings. I can decide what to do about reboots if I want to, right? Then I can move on to schedule. And so whether I want to run it now, whether I want to schedule the updates at a different time, and what that start time is, uh, and so on. If it's a recurring kind of deployment or not, then I can go figure out what I want to do with updates, what update classifications I care about, right? And then specifically any KBs that I want to include or any KBs that I want to exclude. And then finally, I can set up pre and post scripts that I want to run, right? So this reminds me of orchestration groups because you might on servers have a pre a pre or set of pre commands before the update actually gets installed, or a set of post commands to bring the system back after the update gets installed. And this is where you would configure those things, right? Um, okay, and then I can review and create it. So I'm good with that. So that's one option if I want to manage just a machine here, right? Just my machine. If I want to manage multiple machines, then I can. And so let me go back to be specific, right? So I was back here. I have one machine. And so if I click on that one machine and go into update management, then I'm focused on that one machine in update management. And whenever I go deploy to a single machine, it's going to go to that machine, right? Kind of makes sense. So if I have multiple machines here and I want to deploy updates manually or with that process to multiple machines, I have to go through it several times. Well, another way to do it is to be able to go through and deploy to multiple machines at the same time. And so here's an example of doing that. So let's go back into update management. And here we have the option to manage multiple machines. So in this case, I get back to this dashboard, right, where my automation account is. This is the exact same dashboard I was at a moment ago, right? And here I can schedule my update deployment. I can also add machines, manage machines, whatever, from this dashboard. So I'm going to create an update deployment. So I'll just call this demo. And here I do have a toggle of Windows or Linux. Even though I just have Windows, I can toggle that back and forth. I'll choose what items to update. So here I'm going to choose a group that I might want to use, right? And so on. To look at. Let me just go into here and see what this looks like. Choose a resource group. This one. No, not that one. This one, right? And any location, so no filter there. And then I'll add that in, right? And go from there, right? And so one subscription, one resource group. Those are the included items. I'm going to remove that; it was duplicated. And so I'll just move on. So okay, right? And then that's there. And then what I can also do is click to configure what updates I want. So whatever machines that I want. So in this case, I don't have but one. So let's just do machines and uh, L. So here is my machine. But you see the idea of what I'm doing to include for this. And I will click interesting, update agent readiness. So it is ready now. I don't know if that was a UI weirdness or not, maybe just delayed. So I will click OK, right? So I have that configured. Oops, I must not have configured it. Must not have saved it. Let's see, machines, and then L. So let's see, here's this machine. Okay, there we go. So now I added it. Okay, so it's added. And so I now can choose my update classifications. Again, the same kind of drop down I had on the individual. And then I can choose updates to include or exclude by KB ID here. Right? So I don't have any that I care about. And then other options like scheduling. And so how I want to do that, if it's a single schedule, recurring schedule, whatever. Let's hit OK. And then on down, we have the ability to do the pre and post scripts like normal, set our maintenance window, set our reboot options, and hit create. And we create our deployment. So the options that you see between the individual machine deployment and the group of machine deployment, exactly the same, except with the group of machine, you're choosing what machines out of your subscription, out of your resource group that you want to deploy to in this configuration, right? And then we have the same thing, just a little bit of a different UI perspective, but same kind of thing, right? So kind of cool. So that's it for update management for now. I'm going to exit out of this. Yeah, I want to exit out of this, and then exit out of this, right? So that's update management. All right. So what else do we have? So next to that, we have logs, and so logs as soon as this comes up. Logs is my tie-in to log analytics. So if I want to um, do other things outside of update management or other things that use log analytics, if I want to be able to access that environment myself, I can do that, right? So just click on that and it comes up. And if you're familiar with log analytics, you can form your own queries here, work with it, whatever the case may be. I'm not going to do that here. This is just a portal to be able to get into that if you would like. All right. Okay. So let's keep going. What else do we have here? So let's scroll on down a little bit and move on down in the list. Come on, here we go. All right, monitoring insights. So this is really, really cool. So monitoring insights, I remember I mentioned that there are some things in Azure Arc that are similar to or might look like they are monitoring kind of like Operations Manager is. Well, this is one of them, right? And so monitoring insights is going to give you insights into monitoring your VMs, your performance, your health of those, the actual machine scale sets that you're trying to use, any running processes, dependencies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? The goal is to help deliver predictable performance and availability of vital applications and so on by identifying performance issues ahead of time. Right? So let's look at what's there. So if we look at the workspace, right, so we have resource group monitoring. And so actually, let's scroll down here a little bit. There are a couple of shortcuts here that I could click on that really they are just shortcuts that will take me into various other elements. But let's start with resource group monitoring. So if I click on that, then we're going to see some detail about my resource group. Now, here's a really good example. So I've got an Azure Arc server onboarded, right? But I've said a couple of times that Azure Arc is all about extending the control plane for Azure to Azure Arc enabled servers. And the inference is that there are going to be uh, Azure servers and services that are already part of this, and then you're going to add your Azure Arc service to it. Well, here's a good example. I have one Azure Arc enabled server, yet I have 9 total resources in my resource group. So if I look at those and start drilling in, here's my resource group, and then here's my detail, what's in networking, and I could drill into each one of these and whatever. But these are not Azure Arc things. This is my Azure Virtual Desktop, which is an Azure component that is available to me. Under Other, I have things like my resource provider and some detail there. I have runbook detail if I want to drill into that. And then notice what I have at the bottom, Azure Arc servers. And so this is where I will see my server. I could drill into it and do some different things here, but that's kind of just showing you here a good visual example of how we can use Azure Arc alongside things that are not Azure Arc, but just part of Azure, and be able to manage them all in one pane of glass, right? Okay, and this is really focused on active alerts, which there aren't any, so I don't really have anything to show you here about alert severity or whatever. That's why this is a bit boring to look at, but it is what it is, right? Okay, so let's keep going here for a moment. So if we look next at Azure Monitor, then we have a few options here. The first is getting started. Again, here are some shortcuts to be able to get to some different things that are within this node. But if we look at overview, for example, this will give me a good view of my environment. It'll show me monitored nodes, still loading. It'll show me nodes that are monitored. This is going to be, once it loads, my Azure Arc server, right down here. So this is my Azure Arc server that is monitored. Shows me the status, shows me that it's healthy, and so on, right? So it's enabled down here for monitoring. But then I'll see other resources that are not monitored. So I mentioned, again, you can look at Azure resources right alongside Azure Arc resources. These are 3 Azure Virtual Desktops that I have configured that are not currently enabled for monitoring. I could enable those if I want to. right? I can also look at my workspace configuration. I have 3 log analytics workspaces, 2 of whom are enabled, that I could look at if I want to. I could also look at other options to be able to onboard systems into this capability, right? So a few options that I can look at if I want to do that. So really good information just in an overview about what my environment looks like. Now let's get to some cool stuff. So performance. So I just again have my one virtual machine, Azure ARC enabled and loaded onto this. So the data I'm going to get is just from that one virtual machine. But if I scroll down, I start to see, what my different detail might look like. Is this still loading? It may be. Um, yeah, some of this looks like it's still loading. That's okay. We'll just let it do it here. Let's see. Different charts that you can look at. Yeah, so that actually looks like it's still loading. So let's give it a moment. Sorry, I went to overview. I want to go to performance here. This chart. Right, and see what we might have. Should have some data here. That's interesting. Give it a moment here and see if we get any data in the charts. Still not getting data in here. That's okay. Don't need to see it. We'll see it later as we explore some of this more. But you see the charts. It had data earlier. I don't get it, but that's okay. Right? You'll see the aggregate charts that you can look at, the top in list that you can look at and scroll down and see some different things if you have that in your environment and so on, right? Another thing that's really cool here is map, right? So I love this. So again, one system in my environment, so not a lot of cool stuff to be able to see, but hopefully this will paint and we will get some. Yeah, no VMs in the current. Wait a minute. Oh, that's why. Okay, great. That's why the other one didn't show up. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's look at this one now. Okay, so now that I have that in there, then I bet we do get some detail. There we go. Okay, good. So that was my mistake. I had the wrong subscription noted. So you can definitely see some data showing up about the device. So again, not an operations manager replacement, not at all, but useful information perhaps about your systems and how they're running and so forth, right? That you can kind of track and make sure everything's going the way you expect. Let's see if there's anything under this now that I have the right resource group picked. And yeah, just not much, but still some information. Okay, let's go to map, right? Okay, so this to me is really, really cool. So map is going to show you your managed device in your subscription. So here's my managed device, and if I click on that, I'll be able to see detail about it. Let's see if I can decrease this a little bit. I should be able to see detail about it. Let's see. Is it this one? Let's see. There should be some information on the right hand side. Okay, let me get rid of that and let it load its map list again. See if I can get more real estate on the screen and so forth. Okay, there it is. Just had to click on it over here. It made room for it. So I have my subscription here. I have a summary of what I'm monitoring. So one virtual machine total, right? It's called an Azure virtual machine because it's Azure ARC connected. If I click on my uh, device, right, on my server, then I get detail about my server. The name, the operating system, just some general information. I can look at my machine properties. I can look at detail from Azure ARC properties and so forth, right, in here. So just a really good, useful diagram of your machine. Now, other things in here. So I can look at my log events and see what's going on from there, right? I can also look at any alerts that are happening on my device, which there are not any right now, so that's cool, right? But that is an awesome connection to be able to see. Here's the connections that I might have to my server. So 23 connected servers, and I can look and see what's going on with those, right? and failed connections, max live, blah blah blah, whatever they are. No malicious connections, so that's good, right? And then finally, up top, we have any kind of changes. So we have one noisy change that we can investigate, and if I click Investigate Changes, that's going to take me over to the application change analysis screen, which might tell me what's going on, right? And so this will give me some detail about that I can dig into further and see what's going on, right? So pretty cool stuff that we can dig into just looking at the server level like we are. Well, there's other stuff on this map too, such as the ports that the server is connected to, and you can and there may be other things on a production server that we display here that I'm just not aware of as of now because I don't see it in my map. But I can click on the port and I can see um, what's going on and uh, so on about this or about that or whatever it is. So useful information for sure that might help you as you're trying to work with your servers. So let me go back to server Azure ARC, right? So that is the uh, one of the monitoring sections, right? That maybe is useful. Again, not a replacement for SCOM, but a really good piece. Now here's policies. So if we want to actually look at the different policies that might be applied to a device, or the device is not compliant with a policy or is compliant with a policy, we can see it here. So there's just a couple of policies that I've assigned out. So I've got one non-compliant initiative, 5 non-compliant policies. So if I look down into what these are, right, I can see the name of the of the uh, the thing that I care about, right? And then I can see whether it's compliant, whether it's not compliant, and so on. Right? Let me go back. And so we do have policies that are individual. We do have initiatives. So the difference really is that an initiative is kind of a collection of policies, if you will, and the individual policies are where you can go take individual policies and assign them uh, like you would like, right? So there's a lot we could talk about in here, but let me just show you assigning a policy. So here we will talk about which particular subscription and resource group we want, any exclusions that we care about from there, and then we will figure out the policy definition. So I'll just call this um, from the drop down, I'll just choose this to be built in for now, right? So when I click on all types, it will show me everything built in and custom, but I just care about the built-ins right now because I don't have any custom. And you see that it's north of 900. In fact, whenever I looked at it earlier, it was 968, I believe. So between when I looked at it earlier today and now, there have been some additional policies added to the definitions. I can just scroll down and we can see all of these different policies. I'm not going to go through all 900 here, that would take far too long, but you see some ones that might be here, review what's out there. You can see if they're applicable to something you care about and be able to use those, right? Now, if I just want to pick one, let's just choose one to go through the wizard further and then go select that and move on, then I can put in a description, whatever I want, enable or disable that policy. It will say who's assigning it, and then I can click next. If there's any parameters that need to be supplied, here's where I would do it. I don't need to, doesn't look like, so I'm going to click next. If there's any remediation, then I can choose to do that remediation. Again, don't need to right now. But I will say, when I see a remediation, what this makes me think of is a configuration item in Config Manager, where I can alternate or I can potentially do a remediation if I want to. Right? Here's a message for non-compliance, so that I can review and create that assignment out to who I care about. Right? I can also assign an initiative, and it's going to look very much the same. Here, I would just go through and again pick what I want, built-in or custom, and then go through the process to set these things up, right? So very similar kind of thing. Again, we'll spend some time on this, but just wanted to show it to you. It is kind of cool what you can do with this as it is, right? Okay, so let's keep going. So back to my ARC enabled server, and let's look specifically at some other things. So we have change tracking and inventory. Now this is pretty cool. So if you have a server and things have changed on it from one time period to the next, you might care, probably do, hope you do, uh, what those changes are, and being able to track those changes, see what they are, right? And so here I can manage multiple machines if I want to. It'll take me to my dashboard where I have my automation account, and I can decide what VMs, Azure VMs to add, what non-Azure VMs to add. I can see some of the results, here and so on, but I just have my one machine, so I'll back out. And for my one machine, for my environment, there's not a lot that I have going on right now. Let's expand the time window to say the last 7 days, see if there's anything that pops up. And uh, still not a lot going on because it's one machine in my environment. Now, but let me show you what we actually can manage and what we can actually do with it. So look here, edit settings, right? Edit settings is going to show you the workspace configuration and what we're actually looking at to check for changes. And so we have all these registry keys that are there by default that we can look at and keep watch over and so on, right? That's cool. If we want to add additional registry keys, we can just add and say whether the rule is enabled, tell us what registry key we care about, and so on, and we'll watch that registry key too. Windows files, same thing. So there's no real results here, but if I want to add a particular Windows file that I want to monitor for and see if it changes, then I can do that in here. No issue at all. Linux files, same kind of thing. The content of files, if I want to track the content, then I can do that. I'll need a storage account to be able to do that, but you can set that up and track it. So, and then Windows services. What's been going on with my Windows services here if I want to watch that. So again, my lab, boring stuff, one machine, but the potential is pretty cool. Right? Let's see the change types I'm tracking. So all of these I'm tracking. So anyway, good stuff to be able to at least be aware of what's out there and so on. The entry down here, I told you that I did not have set up. I'll click into it just so you can see it, security, right? And so security is our tie-in with Defender for Cloud, right? I think I said Defender for Endpoint, but Defender for Cloud. So I don't have this connected right now. Deciding whether I want to do that in a session, I probably will. No promises yet, but I will probably focus a session on this as we go forward. But this is where you have that tie-in. And then one last piece that I want to show you. So if we scroll down and we look at Windows Admin Center that is in preview right now, this is pretty cool, I think. Right? So imagine that you have a need to manage a server or servers, whatever, but you don't have the ability to directly connect to them, or you don't want to go and connect to your VPN and connect to the servers and go through all that, right? So this is at least another option that will help you get to the server to be able to manage. So I showed you this server here. This is my Azure ARC enabled server right now, right? I could log into it. I can connect to it. It's all there on my laptop running as a virtual machine. But maybe I want to connect to it and be able to manage certain things on it without having to RDP into it, right? So here, I'll just supply the credentials and then sign in. So what's happening is because this server is connected with Azure ARC, we're going through Azure ARC, through Azure, down to that server to connect to it, and we're going to present you some options that you can use to manage that server, right? So the first right here is just general information about the server, uh, current state, memory usage, things of that nature, right? So useful information for sure about what's going on with that server. Then there's some other things. We'll just step through each one. This is the certificate store. So if you need to check something on the cert store and make sure everything's good, whatever the case may be, here's where you can kind of view that, see the certs that are expired, see the ones that have newly expired, whatever the case may be, you can interact with that here, right? Another section where you can interact with the server is in terms of things on the device. So detail about the computer, for example. Um, let's see. Here. Okay, great. So here's a detail that we might have about the server and properties we might care about. That one doesn't look interesting. Let's see if we have one that is. Maybe we'll look at the Hyper-V settings. Interesting there. No, where is one that's interesting? Disk drives. Let's see what's there. Microsoft Virtual Disk. There was one I saw a moment ago that I was able to scroll down into. Let's see if there's another one interesting. This is boring again because it's my lab. Oh, keyboards. Let's see if that one is the one I recall. Yeah, but why is it? Oh, there. Okay, sorry. So I'm showing. I had to bring that up so I can see the detail, the driver, the details about it. Right. If I bring that down, probably I can go to some of those others that I had, like uh, computer system or disk drives, whatever, and then I can see that. Nope, so I don't. Okay, fine. So let's see if I have any display adapters here, properties. Yeah, so I can see it, right? So I can interact with all this. And I'm doing all this without having to connect to the server. So other things I can do, right? So I can look in, what is this one going to be? I don't have the icons memorized yet. Oh, so these are event log stuff, right? So if I care about the security event log, then I can click on that. We'll go load the security event log. We'll see how many items are in the security event log. That should update here in just a minute so I can interact with those things. And so this is a really cool mechanism, again, to be able to maybe troubleshoot some things that are going on the server. Imagine a help desk that might have the access to this and can see what's going on. That's taking a while to load. I know it has 1,800 items and 2,000 items now, so it might take a minute to load, but it's coming, right? And be able to help uh, diagnose things, work with things, that way, right? We a lot of possibilities, with this. I'm not gonna wait for that to load. It's loading. It's just taking a minute. Let's keep going, right? So this node. Again, I don't remember what this is by the icon, but we'll see it in just a moment. Okay, so this is files and file shares that might be on a server, right? And we can see what those are here. We can actually create new shares. We can deal with different things here, right? We can see what's on the C drive. We can browse and do different things. Again, all without being connected. We can create new folders. We can rename and so forth, right? Let's keep going. So this, I think, is the firewall based on the icon that we can interact with, which is cool, right? And then finally settings, so we can go change settings on the device if we want, environment variables, power config, remote desktop, whatever. So I think this one's really cool as an option to be able to get to your servers and be able to manage them. And so that is a whirlwind tour of Azure Arc, right? And wanted to show you all the capabilities of Azure Arc. I haven't even done that because there's certain capabilities that are uh, not exposed. Again, I mentioned you can use Azure Arc to install software on a device. You can. We'll cover that as we dig deeper into the series. But as we wrap up, just a few tips and tricks, not really troubleshooting for now, but in that category of tips and tricks, think about the value that this could provide, the value that you've seen, right? Setting up a POC to test it yourself and see what value is out there. Using standalone ARC, maybe, or you could use ARC in conjunction with Configuration Manager to provide the best tool for the job that you need, right? Um, Again, one thing I really like, may change my mind over time, we'll see, but Config Manager, as an example, does a tremendous job of being able to deploy software in a very elegant way. ARC can do it, but it's not as elegant as Config Manager, at least in my experience so far. So, that might be something to think about. Role-based access controls. So you definitely can configure RBAC to limit control, uh, limit the visibility and permissions for folks in your organization that need them. The log analytics agent. So the log analytics agent, again, not strictly required, but absolutely is required for certain things, right? You may have a log analytics agent out there on your device already that you need to convert to a version that works here. That's actually pretty easy to do to find out what your log analytics agent is. In our documentation, we have a log analytics query that will show you that. In fact, let me just, for sake of completeness, let me just show you that real quick. Um, so this is, let me pull this on the screen. This is a query that you could use with log analytics to be able to see that, right? And so on. Okay, so that wraps up what I wanted to do today in terms of a general overview of the capabilities of Azure Arc as focused on servers. As we go forward, we will add on to this and we will revisit some of these, maybe not all of them, but some of these capabilities, and really dig into those and show you how they're used and capabilities and so on. So for now, we will put a bookmark here, and we will see you next time.